This is Michael Popok. It's After Dark. Do you know where your legal AF is? Speaking of AF, what is going on in New York with Donald Trump's criminal case? Why did the New York prosecutors decide that they weren't going to push to have Donald Trump sentenced before the election? What did Judge Merchan do about it? What happened to that gag order that originally was placed on Donald Trump by Judge Merchan? Is that still in effect? And what do the appeals court in New York, two of them, have to say about it? And what is Donald Trump trying to do by bringing his case over to federal court? And why do federal courts care about this, if at all, especially this late in the game after he's already been convicted and before he's been sentenced? Is that intriguing? Is that interesting? You want to know more? Tune into Legal AF, the podcast. Take a listen.
All right. Let's talk about New York, Georgia, what's going on in these various cases. A lot of developments there. New York, back-to-back losses against Donald Trump. With Georgia, though, there was a slight victory, I guess. The main charges still stick against Donald Trump. In New York, the highest court, which in New York is called their Court of Appeals, at the state court level, the Supreme Court is their trial court. They just try to make it confusing. Trial court, Supreme Court, and then they have the appellate divisions, then the Court of Appeals in New York. In your state court system is the highest. And then you have the federal courts in New York, and then the Second Circuit Court of Appeals oversees the New York federal courts in some other states as well. He loses there. And then the Second Circuit Court of Appeals rejected Donald Trump's efforts to stay or stall the Manhattan District Attorney criminal case where he was convicted, where sentencing is scheduled in November, and they were citing Justice Merchan's ruling. Then you go to Georgia, where you have Scott McAfee buying some of Donald Trump's arguments on the grounds, though, of the supremacy clause, where essentially saying not that there is no remedy, but the remedy is what Jack Smith is doing, not what state prosecutors should be doing. Nonetheless, the big state charges against Donald Trump are still sticking, and he's going to be tried in Georgia. So it's not like a win-win, but certain of the charges got dismissed, but it's the context of supremacy clause. Those should be federal, and they are. And Jack Smith is briefing that, and there was a whole briefing schedule over the next month and a half that we talked about in the past Legal AF that will go before Judge Chutkan. Break it all down, Popok, for us, if you can. All three.
Yeah, no problem. I'll do it relatively efficiently. In New York, the gag order that has been in place, modified, though, by Judge Merchan in the 34 felony count conviction. Donald Trump's been trying to get rid of that gag order, arguing First Amendment protected presidential campaign speech, which is not a thing, by the way. Get rid of the gag order. I already got convicted. Well, what's left to be done? Well, he hasn't been sentenced yet. That's one. Now, the judge did modify it. He originally imposed it where he didn't want Donald Trump to go after any anticipated foreseeable witness or family members of the Manhattan DA or the judge or staff and that kind of thing. But he modified it. And after the conviction happened, he's like, well, we know who the witnesses are, and they were all against you. So if you want to comment about Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen, go ahead. Although that seems to have been, Donald Trump has gotten fatigued about that. You don't hear much about either of those two people on the quote unquote campaign trail, because I just think that just brings up what you started this podcast tonight with, which is, you know, the felon, the prosecutor versus the felon or the predator. So the modified gag order has been in place, and I did a hot take on this. And Donald Trump's got a number of problems as an unwell man who's in shambles and circling the drain financially, morally, and otherwise, and mentally. But his other problem is he's got all these different venues and arenas where the positions he's taking are not consistent. He wants to say things out loud in his defense in order to try to win over the hearts and minds of some remaining voters. But those very same statements, which often verge on racist, misogynist, violent rhetoric that is inconsistent with the positions his lawyers are taking or he's taken in the courtroom, you know, like interviews where he says, or debates where he says, no, I never conceded that I lost the election. No, that was a sarcasm. You know, all these stupid things that prosecutors and their teams are just waiting to scrape all of these comments and interviews and debates and use it against him and at these trials. Something else that can be used against him is in his sentencing. He's not out of the woods yet. He's going to get sentenced the 26th of November by Judge Merchan. And everything that he's done and said before trial, during trial, and after trial, right up until the moment of being sentenced, is fair game for the judge to use and evaluate, including these statements that he's making and his failure to accept responsibility, his failure to show any contrition whatsoever. So why he wants to be let out from under the gag order, I have no idea. It would be much better for him and much wiser for him if he stood in front of his adoring audience, as small as it is at these rallies, and just said, "I'd love to talk about the New York, but we have it up on appeal, and I have a gag order, so I can't talk about it," and let him boo, but don't say anything. So they tried, and the judge said no. And then they took it up to over the summer, they took it up to the First Department Appellate Division in Manhattan, which is the first stop on the appellate train. And they said no. They also said no, saying there's no constitutional question that you're raising. There's no substantial constitutional issue in play. Denied. He didn't like that loss. So he took it up to the highest court, the Court of Appeals, and they rejected it on the exact same grounds. The gag order stays in place. No substantial constitutional question. This whole First Amendment presidential speech thing, we don't know what you're talking about. You're not allowed to undermine the integrity of the very criminal justice system that you just got convicted under. You're no longer, he's no longer, I got wrongfully indicted. As Judge Merchan put it in a recent order, this is now a convicted, unanimously convicted felon, okay, who has continued rights, but he's no longer, there's no more presumption of innocence. He's been convicted 12-0 by a fair and impartial jury. Donald Trump is continuing to try to drag the case before sentencing to federal court, thinking if he can get a federal judge to listen to some of his bullshit defenses post-conviction and pre-sentencing, that it will somehow change the result, that Merchan won't sentence him, maybe a federal judge would sentence him, and then he'd be able to go through the federal appellate process that you outlined and then get over to the United States Supreme Court, because he's got to jump the tracks and hijack the case and bring it over to feds in order to get to the Supreme Court. Well, as we said before smartly about Judge Merchan, he blocked the exit for going to a federal court and or to the U.S. Supreme Court before he sentences, and certainly before the election. Because he said, well, I'm not going to rule on the immunity decision in your state case. So you're not going to be able to take an appeal or argue anything. And since he didn't do that and he postponed on his own the sentencing, the federal appellate court, the Second Circuit, which is the highest court in New York at the appellate level, said, yeah, you don't need an emergency stay of anything related to your attempts to take the case to federal court, because the state court judge gave you an extension of time. So that's denied. Doesn't mean the issue of whether Donald Trump can take a federal appeal ultimately is resolved. It just means it's not going to get resolved before the November election, which is really what matters. And we're not going to talk about it at length today. Maybe I'll pick up with it with Karen on midweek, or maybe during a hot take. But Donald Trump's strategy in all of these criminal cases has been too smart by half, probably because he's guided by people like Alina Habba and Laura Loomer, instead of people like Jack Smith and all the great lawyers in the Manhattan DA's office. I mean, this is an unfair fight, okay? This isn't even cat and mouse. This is, I don't know what this is. He tried to delay the Chutkan case and in DC election interference case, and all he got was Judge Chutkan ordering and allowing the prosecutors to file not one, but two briefs with new evidence that they're going to be airing to the American people before the election. Great work, Donald. That was great. And then over here, he wanted to delay his sentencing in New York, and all that allowed Merchan to do is delay the immunity decision, which would have given him the appeal and the route to the Supreme Court. So another too smart by half moment by Donald Trump in his revolving door of brain trust. And I use that term lightly. Georgia, I mean, I know the reporting's been a term lightly. Welcome back. We do that show that we founded 4 years ago. We created 4 years ago, every Wednesday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. and right here on this YouTube channel for MeidasTouch, exclusively here. Help them get to, wait for this number, 4 million free subscribers before, I don't know where, before 2025 if we can do it. We're building this network with our bare hands, without outside investors. We're completely independent, no censorship. Nobody tells me what to say. I barely know what I'm about to say at any given moment. If you like that kind of show, Wednesdays, Saturdays, 8 p.m., right here on this YouTube channel. And then pick us up on audio podcast platforms of your choice. Find out what 40 million people already know, that Legal AF, there it is above the lower third, Legal AF is the home of law and politics analysis and commentary like no other in the YouTube universe. I defy you to find a better show on law and politics than Legal AF. Not cocky, just observational. So if you're already part of the Legal AF audience, we really appreciate you. We really do. We could not have gotten where we've gotten as Legal AF or the network to 3 million free subscribers without your help. We're growing organically and by word of mouth. Take that clip, send it off to friends and family. Ask them. Here's a little appetizer version of Legal AF, a little bite-sized version. And ask him to subscribe and join our Legal AF, the full-length podcast. If you don't know anything about Legal AF, but you know all the other great content on MeidasTouch because you're here, this is Michael Popok, and I'm making a personal invitation to you to join us Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this YouTube station for MeidasTouch YouTube channel, or pick us up on audio podcast platforms of your choice. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok, and I'm reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.